So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us. It's been really wonderful so far. So you're probably a bit intrigued by our title, Past Time, because it didn't give us a whole lot of information about our project. And I should say, oops, I'm going the wrong way. I should say at the outlet I'm going to just talk for a few minutes and then hand over to Saul. So my name is Hilary Marland, and I'm a historian. I'm a historian of medicine, and I run the Centre for the History of Medicine at Warwick University. And over the last 4 years, we've been fortunate enough to have Wellcome Trust funding for a project on prisoners' health, prisoners' medical care and entitlement to health in England and Ireland. And this is a project that's based, I'm one of the PIs, the other PI is based at UCD in Ireland, University College Dublin. So primarily, this was conceived as a research project, but because it's the Wellcome Trust, and the Wellcome Trust are very keen on public outreach and public engagement, from the very start, we were thinking about the ways that we could translate our research into engagement. And we developed a whole suite of public engagement activities. We've had a play which has been performed in several locations based on our research on mental health, the history of mental health in prisons, particularly the history of solitary confinement. We've done some audio installations based on women's experiences of health in prison. So we've worked with a variety of arts and cultural partners over the 4 years. And our research has encompassed various aspects of history, the history of prison health. One of the largest components is a research project on mental health, but we've also worked on physical health. There's been a project on HIV/AIDS in prisons, a project on women's health and maternity care. But one very important aspect of our research was a project on food and diet, the history of food and diet in prisons. From the outset, we were very keen to do some work in prisons. But I'm a historian. I have no experience of the prison system. I go to archives. So we did two smart things, I think. And I think it comes back to Helen, I think has gone, Heather has gone now, but she made this point about working with experienced partners. And that's exactly what we did. First of all, we appointed a public engagement officer to help us with our public engagement work, Flo Swan. And then we organised, we sort of put an advert out to say we were very keen to do some research, to do some work in prisons, which would be based on our research, but working with an organisation, an arts organisation, that had a lot of experience of working in the criminal justice system. And that's how we got, that was our second smart move. We linked up with Saul and his theatre company, Ride Out. So the idea of the project was to work in HM Prison Hewell, where Saul had already got very good contacts with the governor and had done various projects there already. And we came up with this idea of doing some work on food, diet, nutrition in prison. And this would have a large historical component because we were very keen that our research would be used as part of this project. But it also had several other elements. We recruited, in the end, 2 groups of men to work on the project, 2 separate sets of workshops. And the idea was that they would become creative researchers. We were very keen not to go into the prison and give a lecture or anything like that. We really wanted the men to be engaged with our historical materials, and also then to bring some of their own experiences, their own knowledge to the project. And in addition to that, the men, using some of the historical prison food recipes that we unearthed, reproduced some of these recipes. Gruel was one thing they made, bread, but also some more interesting and delicious treats from prison food in the past. So additional to doing the historical research, they also acquired certificates in food hygiene and nutrition, because we really wanted the men to take something away from this project. And then, probably the most important part of the project, they worked with Saul, definitely the most important part, to produce a piece of dark drama which Saul will talk about, based on our historical research in part, but also based on their own imaginations and interpretations of that material. So these were the sorts of things we brought in to HM Hewell. We brought in a lot of images, for example, of prison kitchens in the past. This is an image of Rochester Prison in 1912. This is making bread in Grendon Prison in 1970. I thought it was earlier than that, but it's 1970. They wore those dinky little white jackets. We brought in things like architectural plans of prisons. And what surprised us, I think, going in and talking about our research and talking about some of our materials, is how much the men we were working with already knew about the history of prisons. So they taught us quite a lot, and they had some very interesting questions as well. We also brought in a whole range of other documents. We took in a lot of prison memoirs, for example, where prisoners from the 19th, 20th century talked about their experiences of being in prison, particularly their experiences of prison diet and prison nutrition. Things like dietary tables we brought in, where there were various classifications of the diet which was used for different groups of prisoners based on gender, based on whether they were doing heavy labour, based on the length of time they'd been in prison. And of course we're talking about diets here that were usually pared to the bare minimum. And prison diets in the historical past were not very good and oftentimes not very nutritious either. I'm going to pass over to Saul now, because I've talked a little bit about historical research, but I went in with my colleague Margaret Charleroi, who was one of the postdocs on the project, and we spent a little bit of time in HM Hewell working with the men, working with Saul and talking about some of our historical material, and then Saul took it from there.
Thank you. Thank you. Just before I go on to the cookery bit, one of the things that we were just talking over lunch about this, in terms of this as a project that is about bringing professional artists into work in a prison setting, it was also important from my perspective that we were also bringing historians. Partly as a challenge to the historians to try and explain what a historian does and why we should have historians. Because the thing about prison is that, not always, but prisoners will often ask those kind of questions, like what's the point of art, what's the point of doing drama, what's the point of a historian? So we had those kind of conversations, and I think they were really illuminating. Also, as part of this project, obviously we were looking at the history of prison food. And it's one thing that is guaranteed if you ever go into a prison and you talk to prisoners, the subject of prison food will come up. And generally the food in prison is shit. It doesn't matter which prison you're in, even if the food is really rather good in that prison, it will always be characterised as bad. So we weren't going in to kind of say, look, you have it good, guys, you know, look at what it was like in the past. But really it was much more about talking about the place of food within institutions, but equally the place of food within culture. And that food is a really important part of culture. And that led to some fantastic conversations where men were really starting to say, you know what, I've never thought about this before, because when I'm on road, when I'm outside, I basically just eat in McDonald's, or I eat in the chicken shop, or that's where, and food is just something that's functional. So we talked a lot about how food is prepared in prison and how food is eaten in prison. So currently, in most prisons, you get your food from the servery, so it's been cooked in the kitchens and then it comes over in trolleys, heated trolleys, and then you get it at the servery, and then you go back to your cell and you eat it alone, or more often than not now you're sharing with someone else. But essentially your cell is also where your toilet is, so you eat in a toilet to some extent. So there's an issue to do with the food that prisoners get from the servery and the quality, good or bad, of that. And then equally, it's the cooking that they do in their cells. And this too was a really important part of what we were exploring. And we were also very fortunate to have a fantastic governor who said, yes, you can have a photographer with you, and yes, you can go and photograph in the cells. So this is real. We went over one lunchtime, we took in some ingredients, and so what he's preparing there is a recipe, or a couple of recipes based on recipes that we were given. And you will notice there the use of the kettle. So kettle cooking is a big thing in prison. And in fact, we got some special advice from this prisoner about how not to burn your element out. Because these are modern kettles, they've all got flat bottoms. Because I kept thinking, it's going to get stuck in the element. Because, modern kettles don't know. So, within the shows that we ended up producing with the men, we incorporate, certainly in the first show, we incorporated those model experiences and did a kind of comparative study, I guess, with food from prison in the past. The process, so it was 3 weeks, and the beginning of the process involved a day of doing drama, and then we worked with Margaret and Hilary, and then as the days progressed, it was a mix of either doing drama sessions or doing cookery sessions. Now I should say that in the first, this is one of the things about working in prisons, is that they always will say, oh yeah, you can come do that, it won't be a problem, and then of course you get there and it's a major problem. They've not really thought all the things through. And at Hewell there was the infamous staff bistro that has been on the cards for many, many months. And it never was completed during the time that certainly the first run of the project. So what happened was that men were going across to the main kitchen. So they were trying to do cookery of old recipes like gruel in amongst other prisoners who are just preparing all the food for the main prison. But we did it, we managed to do that. And then that led to the creation of, we had 2 performances. So each residency ended with 2 shows. So one of the shows was for invited audience members from outside, so that included family and friends of the prisoners involved, as well as people that we wanted to invite in. And then the second performances, which were in the afternoons, they were for other prisoners and for prison staff. And both of those performances included food. So the audience got to eat gruel, they got to eat bread, which was based on a 1901 bread recipe from prison. Frankly, I think better than the bread that they eat now, because it has nothing else. It's like a French bread, but it's got a very long overnight sponge. Any of you interested in bread making? And then we had the infamous prison vegetable stew, which is a meat. It's basically beef with some onion and some potato. And then we varied. The first performance we had a bread pudding. It was a plum pudding, which was based on a 1940s recipe, which interestingly was released by the Prison Commission as a way to try and improve morale during the war, World War II. And so you find sometimes that there are, the early history of prison food is very much that it's about nutrition, it's about the value of that food, and comparisons to the number of calories that you should be taking. So we talked a lot about, you know, the fact that Victorian people, their calorie intake was much higher than our, recommendedly higher than the current recommendations, but obviously that's because people were working manually. The things that were on the prison food diet that have no nutritional value whatsoever included our plum pudding, but also cocoa. And over time, cocoa was in, then it was out, then it was back in. So it's again talking about food as control, a mechanism of control in prison. So, following the performances, so we ran, one project was in March, and then we did another one in July this year. Both of those projects were part of the evaluation which we commissioned. So we had, there's the sort of historical research elements, and then we had an additional research element which was we commissioned the new Institute for Community Research and Development at Wolverhampton University. And I should say that the cohort of prisoners that we originally were targeting, we worked very closely with the Safe Custody Unit within the prison. So we wanted to target prisoners that were either at risk of or currently self-harming, or were at risk of suicide. So individuals within the prison service, they have a process called ACT, which is their process for monitoring prisoners who may be at risk of suicide and self-harm. So we were very interested in what is the potential impact of this kind of work on people's ability to cope within prison. Now look, this is where I get really very sophisticated with my... The actual project, we had she's now just started her PhD. She's done a huge report, so I've taken some of the headlines from the summary. So, total of 22 prisoners altogether. So overall, there was a reduction in what she calls mental disengagement. So essentially, more engagement in positive coping mechanisms. A reduction in the focus on venting emotion through violence and or aggressive behaviour. A significant decrease in the use of substances. Now, those of you that know, have worked in prisons will know that if you want to get drugs, go to prison. And actually, they are really prolific, and we had individuals that had been prolific substance misusers, but certainly during the time that we were running the project, there was a significant decrease in using substances as a mechanism for coping with problems. And finally, there was an increase in coming to terms with the environment that you're in. But I want to say something else about something that I noticed. I mean, having worked using theatre in prison for over 30 years, I saw something that I don't know that I've ever been that conscious of before. And I don't know if it's whether to do with the fact that we had a photographer working with us, or whether it's actually an indicator of the really poor state that our prison system is in. But we got permission to allow the prisoners to have up to 5 prints of photos each. So of course we took in all the photos, or a selection of them, and showed them, and then they could choose which ones they wanted. And we made sure that we got some really nice photos of them in the drama, so that we're looking where they looked really good. And I was amazed actually that most of the men didn't want those. They wanted the photos of us all just stood together as a group. And it struck me that what they want is they want the memory of this collective creative endeavour. And that was really important, that coming together and doing this work, that was what was really essential, was that they got to work with each other in a way which was not competitive, although obviously we use a lot of games, so there was competitive elements in it. But I guess, and those of you that have done this work a lot know that in the end this is about achievement and a memory of that achievement. And I think that was really significant. What we've got here is just a slide. So another part of the project was that we were disseminating information about the project as well as at events like this. But I don't know if any of the university folk here this is the sort of the cynical part of me looking at the Tate. The Tate have done a very smart thing, which is that they offer out the 5th floor of the Tate. Is it 1 week a year that you get?
You can do it for a few days or for a week.
Right.
However deep your pockets are.
So it's a really clever bit of sponsorship. So the university could say, and we did, we said, yes, there's going to be an exhibition at the Tate. And prison governors like the sound of that, and the Arts Council. So, the university buys that bit of time there. So we had an exhibition there. And I guess just to finish, is to say that we are going to do some more work around this. We invited some staff from Stafford Prison to come and see the show, and they really enjoyed it. And that's led to, it's in development at the moment, but a sort of continuation of this project, which is the development of the history side. So we're sort of conceiving a series of 2-week prison residencies where history is the core theme. So we will do an adapted version of Past Time, which is the food project. Then we're looking at doing something about the history of hard labour, which is going to be a dance piece. We're going to do something about the history, at the moment, it's really the history of people with learning disabilities in prison. So the history of, and there's a lot of language that was used in the past to describe that. And that's going to be a puppetry piece. And then we're going to finish with something about the history of conscientious objectors in prison, because they had a very significant impact on raising the quality of food, and that we want that to be a core piece. So to develop a choir in prison to do that. So, anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to mention, we did do a slide. I brought a few cards, but not enough, if a lot of people are interested. We have got a website, and if you just type in HIST Prison Med, you will get to our website, and there's more information about Project Past Time, but also about all our activities. The other thing we're doing is organising a conference in December, which will take place at the Shard in London. Warwick Business School has a suite of offices, which we also have to pay a great deal of money for, of course.
Sorry,
but we're bringing together all the various elements of the work we've done, engaging with the arts and also policymakers throughout this project. So I'd say if anyone's particularly interested in finding out more about what we've done and about our work in the history of prisons, but also all our public engagement activities, come and grab me. And I've got a few cards as well for you to take away.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got time for a few questions. So May's just grabbing the mic.
Hi, that was brilliant. thank you. So I've got just a couple of questions, like quite specific ones. I'm an archaeologist and we're putting together a project in the Leicester prison and possibly Nottingham as well, because I know the guy that's the writer in residence at Leicester prison, so we're going to do something hopefully a bit similar. The two things that I was just wondering about is, I think you've answered them really, but like how was it that you chose to study the food aspect specifically rather than something different? And also, when you were doing the cooking and stuff like that, did they actually get to go in the kitchens and like use the knives and stuff like that? Because that's something that we're kind of coming up with a bit of bother against. So yeah, just those.
But do you want to handle the food because that was your thing?
Yeah, I mean, we've done lots of different elements of the research with different arts and cultural partners. So we've done some work in HMP Peterborough, working in the mother and baby unit, looking at the history of maternity care in prisons, and we've done some work on mental health. But I think in terms of working in prison with a group of prisoners, we thought food, I mean, as Saul mentioned, it's an excellent subject because in institutions, all institutions, not just prisons, food is so important. So I think that was it was a good project because the men could really relate to it. They knew a lot about food, they knew a lot about what they ate, they had very strong views on this, very strong. And, it just seemed an obvious choice. And I suppose as well, there's a slight reticence with taking in, as our first try at doing a collaborative project in prison context, with a subject like mental health. And now we're feeling a bit braver, probably, when I've been in a prison, and sort of learnt a lot from working with Saul. So I think we feel comfortable to move on to explore other areas. Food was just great, and also there was a practical, hands-on kind of element which we could incorporate, because we were very keen. We're historical researchers, we're working on prisons for 5 years. We really wanted, this sounds a little bit corny, but we did want to do something which had a kind of positive impact, even if it was on a small group of prisoners. So this seemed an obvious area to develop.
Just on this, so the issue with knives, yes, they use knives. What happens is that men were security cleared. So I mean, this is one of the issues about working in forensic settings is you go in as the artist and you want people to volunteer. How they end up in the room with you is not necessarily a process of volunteering. Although most of the men that we ended up working with, most of them had signed up. But equally, when those lists of names are put in, they will go to security for vetting. So we also made sure that we had to make sure that anyone that was involved would be cleared to be able to use knives. And in fact, on the second run, because the second run we worked with the VP wing, which meant that there was no way that they would be allowed to work in the main kitchen because they would be mixing with main location prisoners. So VP is vulnerable prisoners. So we ended up taking our own knives in. So, and then you just go through the sort of standard security procedures for doing that.
But it sounds like you are quite a good governor who was like for letting you take pictures and stuff. So I guess once it goes to them, it's kind of out of your hands, that process, isn't it? It's just kind of getting to the point where they'll agree to it in the first.
But this is where it's really good having a professor of history on board as well, because we decided we would have a meeting with the governor, didn't we? And I brought you along to kind of show you off and say, look, this is really important. But he is a very supportive governor at that institution. So.